So as I said, we really are delighted to be hosting this debate. When I looked back, NCW has been concerned about the impacts of climate change on our lives as far back as 2001. And we passed a resolution then calling on the government to work through the United Nations to construct, as we phrased it then, a long-term structured and coordinated response to the problems posed by climate change. Wouldn't that be great? And this resolution was reaffirmed in 2004, and then followed up by another resolution in 2020, when we called again on the UN to cooperate to strengthen action to protect the planet from climate change. And we urged the international community then not to return to pre-COVID emission levels, and instead to integrate climate action into recovery programs. And then in 2023, we called on the international community to cooperate to radically strengthen climate action plans. And then just last year, 2024, we passed a resolution with a focus on consumer protection, calling on the government to ensure that the necessary information, advice and protection is in place for consumers of green products and services, with so many coming onto the market. We were concerned about greenwashing. So it's an issue that is close to our hearts at NCW, and marvelous to be part of the partnership of organizations that's working towards this. So our first speaker today, I'm delighted to introduce to you, is Emma Holland-Lindsay. Emma is Director of Campaigns and Membership at the National Federation of Women's Institutes. And I'm sure many of you know the Women's, Emma will tell us more, I know, but just briefly, that the Women's Institute is a founding member of the Climate Coalition and has got a very active network of climate ambassadors across the country who encourage members in green activities. So a great sort of real on the ground movement, which is engaging with people. So Emma, I'm going to pass over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gilly. And can I just say how delighted I am to be here today. We've had such a long relationship, joint working with National Council for Women. So it's wonderful that our two organisations can come together where we have shared interests. And I'm really interested to hear from our brilliant other speakers today and hear their perspectives. So thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this. And I have seen some familiar names on the screen, so I'm looking forward to our discussion a bit later. So just start with a little bit about the WI for those who perhaps haven't encountered us before. WI is the largest voluntary women's organisation in the UK. We have about 180,000 members across 5,000 WIs. So the WI group is what you would join if you wanted to be part of our organisation. Most of those meet face to face, but we also have a growing network of virtual WIs that just meet online. And that has been wonderful to enable women who perhaps can't get to a regular meeting to be part of our movement. We are celebrating our 110th birthday this year, which is wonderful. And we're really proud of our history of environmental campaigning, which really goes back almost to our earliest days. So our first environmental campaign was launched in 1927, where our members passed a resolution expressing concern about pollution, because at that time waste oil was being thrown overboard from ships into the sea. So we really started pretty early in our earliest days, and since then sustainability, protecting the environment, has always been a running theme throughout our work. And some of our most famous campaigns have come directly out of that ethos. So in 1954, we passed probably our most famous resolution, which was all about tackling the increasing problem of litter in the countryside. And that resolution led directly to the founding of the Keep Britain Tidy campaign, which is still going strong today, which is wonderful. And we're quite unique as an organisation in that all of our campaigning work comes directly from our members. So any WI member can identify an issue she's concerned about, whether that's in her local community, nationally, internationally, bring it to the attention of her WI. And then we have a year-long discussion and debate process culminating with our annual meeting, which we just had this week, where resolutions are debated, voted on, and ultimately adopted by our members. And so our climate change work stemmed directly from one of those resolutions passed in 2005. And since that time, it's been a consistent theme in our campaigning activity. And as Jilly expressed, that has translated both into our local work, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly, but also our national work. And we're very proud to have been one of the founding members of the Climate Coalition, which is now the UK's largest alliance of people and organisations working to tackle the climate crisis and also to restore nature. So why do we think climate change is such an issue for women? Well, we've long recognised as an organisation, as I'm sure all of the organisations on the call have done, that climate change is not gender neutral. And actually women and girls are impacted differently by climate change, often, unfortunately, bearing the brunt of climate impacts, both globally and in the UK. So across the world, obviously, as our weather becomes more volatile due to the impacts of climate change, we are seeing more weather-related disasters. And actually, women are much more likely to be displaced as a result of those, less likely to be able to access relief easily. And then when it comes to reconstruction, we all too often see that investment in things like green jobs are not open or not equally available to women. And also in the UK, we find that women are still seeing the impacts of climate change disproportionately here as well. So there's research showing that women are much more vulnerable to extreme heat, for example. We know that women are much more likely to live in poverty in this country. So they're less able to make changes to their homes, for example, to reduce their energy bills. And we know that women generally face greater financial vulnerability. So when there is a climate shock, they are less able to cope and to recover from those. And this has always been a theme through our climate campaigning, because we think this gendered aspect is not well recognised. And particularly when it comes to things like international climate negotiations and all of the decision making that's happening at many levels in our country and internationally. So despite the fact that women are heavily impacted by climate change, they remain underrepresented when it comes to climate decision making. So just to give you one example, the COP climate talks, which I don't think will be news to anyone, COP29, which took place last year, only 35% of the delegates attending that conference were women. And actually just 8 out of 78 world leaders in attendance were women. And then similarly, a UK study found that women, in terms of council meetings, so going right back down to the local level, women accounted for only 1/3 of speaking time during climate change meetings. And women of colour made up just 2% of the time. So we know that women are differentially impacted, and there's an intersectional angle. So women of colour are often even worse impacted, for example. So what have we been doing at the WI? Well, our ethos at the WI from our earliest days is that everyone has the power to be a change maker in their own community. And we firmly believe that women are uniquely placed to make change on these issues, both in their communities and on the national stage as well. And key to our ethos as an organisation is the power of bringing women together. We're an educational charity, we always have been, and we believe that there's great power in conversation, whether that's happening in a WI meeting, a kitchen table, out in the community more widely. And we see that grassroots network as being central to how we can make change on climate change. So in 2016, as Julie mentioned, we launched our Climate Ambassador programme. And that now includes over 400 WI members across England, Wales and the islands. And I can see some names on here who look familiar in terms of being part of that network of members. So thank you if you are a climate ambassador and you've joined us today. And this programme was really created because we felt that there was a silence around climate change and people didn't feel confident to talk about these issues in their own communities. It was something that, you know, it's such a huge problem that we're trying to solve as a society, and these issues and these challenges feel almost too big to grapple with. And there was a feeling that, you know, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a climate scientist. How can I talk about these issues? What can I bring to the table? So we set up the network and we wanted to encourage our members to go out there and raise awareness. And as I say, that can be really starting with small scale actions. So having a conversation with a friend about climate change, talking about it in the home, talking about it in your WI. So our climate ambassadors have done brilliant work going around to local WIs and doing presentations about climate change and what we can do. And the idea was really about kind of ending that silence, bringing climate change close to home, looking around in our communities and thinking, okay, what are the things we need to protect from climate change? Where are we seeing climate impacts? Are the seasons changing? Is it impacting our farmers? Is it impacting flooding? We know lots and lots of our communities have been experiencing extreme weather events. So really making what is a very big intangible issue and feels often too big to solve into something that you can do something about locally. And the ethos of this programme has really been, we can all make changes in different ways in our lives. And that might be thinking about how you shop, thinking about the choices you make when you're doing your weekly food shop, or perhaps the clothes you buy. So we've got a really strong theme within the WI around making sustainable choices in our own lives, thinking about buying secondhand, repairing what we have, because we know the climate impacts of the fast fashion industry are huge, for example. But it's also included much more traditional campaigning work. So our climate ambassadors have been brilliant at building relationships with their local MPs. They've invited them to come to WI meetings and talk about climate change, or they've held community engagement events, perhaps partnering with a local school. And also brought the traditional WI, what I would call creative flair, to bear. And you'll know, those of you who know about the WI, we have a very strong history of craft and creativity within our organisation. And our members have brought that to bear on our climate change campaign. And that has proved to be a beautiful way into these issues for people who perhaps would feel put off by a traditional protest. So one of the initiatives we've supported for a number of years is called Show the Love, which is a climate coalition campaign, which encourages all of us to think about the things and the people and the places that we love and that we care about, that we want to protect from climate change, whether that's here in our own communities or internationally. So members have crafted green hearts and placed them in installations in their local community to raise awareness. They've handed them to their MPs, and MPs have, you can never describe the joy an MP experiences when someone has spent hours crafting something for them. It's been a beautiful way into conversations with members of Parliament who perhaps might not consider themselves to be traditionally engaged in climate change issues. And we've also used it as a public awareness tool. So there is a lovely website called Show Your Stripes, which I will put into the chat once I finish speaking, which turns average temperatures into colours. And we have members who have turned those into what we call climate scarves. So you can see the change in temperatures across a particular location over the last 100 years. And that's really powerful, actually, to see visually represented the way that our climate is changing. And again, that has proved a lovely way to engage with both decision makers and local people as well. And we also, obviously, COP26 came to the UK, came to Glasgow a few years ago, and we took that craft ethos to our campaigning. So we were very inspired by Greta Thunberg and her statement that actually too many climate agreements have loopholes in them. So our WI members created no more loopholes bracelets, and they presented them to MPs. We took a giant one with us to Glasgow, and it proved just a wonderful way to engage the public, delegates and decision makers in these issues. So we bring our creativity to this campaign, and we very much believe that there's a role for everyone in campaigning on climate change, whether you're sort of class yourself as a traditional campaigner or you want to bring your creativity and your craft to bear. In 2023, we held a climate change conference in London, and that brought together our members, leading figures in academia, and also parliamentarians and decision makers. We had a really wide-scale conversation that day about what needs to happen to tackle climate change and what we can do as women in our own communities and nationally as well. We talked about how we can build a more diverse climate movement, how we can tackle climate change locally, and also how we can send a stronger message to decision makers about the urgency of what needs to be done. And that work has really led on to our latest focus, which is about a fair green future, which again really centres the experiences of women, but also takes an intersectional approach in considering the differential impacts of climate change on different groups. And we believe that at the heart of this must be community mobilisation, because unfortunately, too many MPs, too many decision makers are still not hearing about climate change. So when they look at their post bags, when their staff say to them, what emails have we had this week? What are the issues that are front of mind for our constituents? They're still not hearing about climate change. And if we're going to tackle this issue, we need to build that public mobilisation. So we've had a wonderful partnership with an organisation called Larger Us, which again, I'll share some more details in the chat. And that has been about how do we go about in our daily lives talking about climate change? Because, I go on the school run, I, play dates in the park, I'm in the post office queue, and climate change just doesn't come up. There's a silence about this. There's still a silence. And so we've worked with Larger Us to run climate conversations pilots where our members have undergone training, and they've started talking about climate change, not with people they knew, but perhaps people in the post office queue, people they're getting a coffee from in the coffee shop, finding ways into having a non-judgmental conversation about climate change, not trying to persuade anyone, not trying to say, sign my petition, or don't you think it's terrible what's going on, but a neutral conversation just to start to break down those barriers to talking about it, because we think that is key in getting wider change. So our ethos has always been very community-led, grassroots-led, and believing in the power that women have to make change. And the final thing I just wanted to mention, because I know this audience will be, I'm sure, very keen to get involved, is that there is a huge moment coming up on the 9th of July. So the Climate Coalition is organising what we hope to be the largest climate lobby that's ever taken place in this country. It's called Act Now, Change Forever. Couldn't be a more important moment to be talking to members of Parliament about climate change. It's taking place in Westminster. The idea is we all come together from many different organisations to meet with MPs and talk to them from the heart about why tackling climate change, restoring nature, is so important to all of us. And I would love it if members on this call would consider coming along to that. It's going to be an amazing day. So I'll post further information about that into the chat once I've finished speaking. But our final thought really, I suppose, is we all have the power to make change on climate change, whether that is the choices we're making in our own lives, the conversations we're having with our friends and family, or whether it's going to lobby our MPs and decision makers locally or nationally. And I really hope that through this discussion today, we can inspire more of you to get involved in this campaign. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Very good. Emma, thank you so much. So much to excuse me, to think about in that presentation, and fascinating to hear of the real grassroots action that WI is taking. Could we take a few questions to Emma before we move on to our next speaker? Does anyone have any? Could you put your hands up? Pop your cameras on for a moment and put your hands up if you want to ask a question. Just looking across my screen. Anyone got a comment? Anyone got experience as a climate change ambassador and the sorts of things that you've been doing as a climate change ambassador? Perhaps that would be interesting to hear.
I can see a few lovely comments in the chat actually from a couple of names that are familiar climate ambassadors talking about their scarves, which is wonderful.
Oh, lovely. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So climate scarves. That's a great idea.
I'll see if I can find some more pictures of those as well.
That would be great, Emma. Thank you. I can't.
Hello, can I just, it's Sandra here can you hear me? It's Sandra here in Herefordshire.
Oh, yes, sorry, I did, yes.
I'm one of the ones that commented about the climate scarf. I
You
am actually busy making little green heart badges to give to everybody that comes to the Christmas Tree Festival, because last year when we held an afternoon tea with councillors, I gave every one of those a green heart, and we had a follow-up this just recently, and they all came back with the little green hearts on their lapels.
Oh,
And
great.
even though one was a little bit dishevelled, she said to the other councillor, well, I iron mine when it gets a bit messy, so put the iron on it, it'll work, still work. So I just thought I'd comment that, you know, here in Herefordshire, we're doing what I think is a fantastic job.
Brilliant.
That's wonderful, Sandra. And I mean, the amount of stories I've heard about decision makers, whether it's councillors, MPs, being presented with something that members have spent so long crafting and just being delighted. I mean, we had one MP who, WI member, sent him a green heart in the post, and for some reason the letter wasn't signed, or he couldn't find out who it was. So his office contacted us at the NFWI, and we helped to track down this member. He went round her house and thanked her. So he was absolutely over the moon. And it is, you know, it's a way in that's not so confrontational, and that opens a space for a conversation. And they are a conversation starter. So yeah, it's wonderful to hear what you're doing, Sandra.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. So I think that issue of opening a space for a conversation is such an important one, isn't it? Rosemary, you've got your hand up. Rosemary Horsley. Just
yes,
tell us where you're from, Rosemary.
I am from Nottingham, and I'm a member of the BPW UK Green Group.
Lovely.
I'm interested to find out where you sourced your training.
Yeah, so we've worked with a few different organisations on climate communication training. The most recent one is an organisation called Larger Us, and I can put their link to their website in the chat. And they've done a couple of rounds of climate conversation training with WI. We're just starting our second round. But they've worked with a number of different organisations, from very local grassroots organisations to national ones. So they are excellent source of information. The other organisation we have always also worked with a couple of times over the years is Climate Outreach, who again are a brilliant organisation. I think they're charitable as well, and they specialise in turning this climate change into something that you can talk about without feeling like you've got to be a scientist. They've done some brilliant work on how to engage on climate change. So I'll very happily share those links into the chat.
That's absolutely lovely. And especially as women, we've got to work clever, haven't we, to
Yes.
level up this representation.
That would be great. Thank you. That's an excellent question, Rosemary. Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for sharing those links. And then people can jot them down from the chat. Fabulous. Lovely. So I think we'll go on to our second speaker now. Then we can pick up more general questions that go across all speakers at the end. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Perry from the Anglican Communion. And I think Elizabeth will tell us more, of course, but I think Elizabeth's going to focus particularly on, I think, this lovely notion of the communion forest, which is a global movement of local activities to encourage forest protection, tree growing, and ecosystem restoration. Wonderful. So Elizabeth is going to talk to us. Elizabeth has a presentation, so we'll just do screen sharing. So if you could turn your cameras off again, that would be great. Thank you. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Gilly. And it's just such a delight to be here. Thank you so much. And to get the pleasure of being able to hear of what others are doing. So I'm the Programmes Director at the Anglican Alliance, which comes part of the Anglican Communion. So as Gilly has said, I'm mostly going to share about the Communion Forest, but I will just mention a few other things that the Anglican Communion as a whole is doing. So the Communion Forest, let me tell you in a nutshell what it's all about. So it's an exciting initiative of the Anglican Communion, which pulls us together in tree growing and ecosystem conservation, protection and restoration throughout the world. You might notice the CPR there of conservation, protection and restoration. It's not even 3 years old yet, this initiative. It was launched in August 2022 during the Lambeth Conference of Bishops. Now, at this point, some of you might be going, what's the Anglican Communion? Is that the same as the Church of England? The Church of England is part of the Anglican Communion. They're not the same thing. So the Anglican Communion is the world's third largest denomination, and there are over 85 million members across 165 countries across the world. There are 42 now provinces. Those are independent, autonomous, but interdependent churches. So the Church of England is one of them, but you can see the others up on the screen there. Church of Australia, the Episcopal Church in the United States, many, many expressions of the Anglican Church across the world. We're a kind of family of churches. And so we are global in reach. So the idea of the Communion Forest is that it's a global initiative, but that is made up of lots and lots and lots of individual initiatives that are undertaken locally, whether that's by an individual or a parish church or a whole diocese, a collection of churches, and that's the way the communion is structured, or within a province, one of these autonomous churches, like the Church of England. And importantly, the activities are chosen locally. So there's no central direction telling people what to do. And this way, they can be geographically and environmentally appropriate. So on the day it was launched, I kept getting asked, how many trees are going to be planted? And we said, it's not about numbers, it's about quality. And still the journalists were going, how many trees? And so eventually I said this, and this, which is, at that point we were saying, this could well become one of the most ecologically diverse and geographically widespread initiatives in the world. And that's what I've been saying ever since. And then I caught myself maybe a couple of months ago saying it's got that potential. And then I thought, hold on a minute, I think we're already well on the way to that being fulfilled, which was a very exciting moment, realizing that. And I'm going to show you why I think that. So the Communion Forest builds on what was already happening across the Anglican Communion. There's already just more initiatives happening than you can possibly imagine, whether that's an amazing green schools initiative rather in the Church of South India, or Franciscan brothers in the Solomon Islands who are campaigning to stop logging, or not stop logging, but the way it's impacting on human rights in the Solomon Islands. Whether that's people giving out trees for confirmation, like Bishop Graham Usher, who's the Bishop of Norwich, or initiatives in as far as the Amazonia or Zimbabwe or in the Philippines. All sorts of things are happening, and the Communion Forest deliberately builds on that. So why have we got it? Why did we have a Communion Forest? What's the problem? You already know what the problem is. The world is at risk because of the triple threat of climate change, the destruction of biodiversity and pollution. And one of the things we see in my position within the Anglican Alliance as part of the Anglican Communion is we all know that the climate crisis is an existential threat to people and plants and species. But one of the things see are the knock-on impacts on people's lives. Obviously, climate change through disasters take lives, and they destroy habitats, and they take away people's homes and their livelihoods, and they cause food shortages. And as a result of that, people migrate. And they migrate essentially as climate migrants. They arrive as economic migrants. People don't like economic migrants. So there are all sorts of issues there. And this all disrupts communities and it breaks up family. And it's costly both financially, but the trauma that people are going through is just horrific. So the communion forest was set up as a response to that. So we see it as a kind of practical response, a spiritual response, and also a symbolic response in the sense of we want to say we care. And it's also an act of hope. I like to think of it as defiant hope for the welfare of humanity. We're not going to let it happen. We're not going to just stand by. So the overall aim is to significantly increase Anglican tree growing. And it's not just about trees, it's this ecosystem conservation, protection and restoration around the world, and deepen care for creation within the life of the church. Why? Why spirituality? Because we firmly believe that the environmental crisis isn't just a physical crisis, it's a spiritual crisis as well. So you can see the quote. This comes from one of the calls that was written at the Lambeth Conference, agreed to by the bishops who were visiting from across the Anglican Communion. And at the heart of our thinking, it was best articulated by Indigenous Anglicans from across the world. And they talk about needing to move from a Western extractive mindset that sees the earth as something that you can take from. That's why we talk about resources that we help ourselves to. And they're saying we have to reframe in terms of relationship to understand the interconnections. So our Indigenous Anglicans express it best, but it's also a biblical point of view, and it's the scientific point of view. Where everything interconnects, obviously. Climate change doesn't recognize national boundaries, just like the pandemic didn't. And also it's written large in our biblical and faith heritage. And one of the verses we use a lot comes at the end of the Bible, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So how's it going? What does it actually look like in practice? So since the launch, there have been lots of initiatives. To be honest, when we launched, we didn't know if the bishops, if it would get taken up. And it's taken off beyond our wildest expectations. It's been just really exciting. So one of the first initiatives we heard about was a new communion forest in Zimbabwe, where they're restoring 105 hectares of church land, getting it back to a biodiverse plot. Then in Australia, there's something called the Abbey. It's already a retreat centre. They wanted to be part of the initiative. And one of the things they've been doing, a new thing last year, is launching prayer trees across the whole of their diocese, getting these trees set up grown in different places that people can gather around to pray and to maybe put prayers on. It's turned out to be really popular. Last summer, we had the launch of the Communion Forest in Central America. This is one for the whole region, a space where people can come and enjoy nature and connect with their faith and with nature and with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And when they launched it, for some reason, the bishops decided they would plant the trees fully robed in 40-degree heat. Go figure. This happened in February, a mass planting of mangroves in the Philippines. Mangroves are really important for to protect against sea surges. They're little nurseries for all sorts of species. Philippines is just fabulous. They planted 20,000 mangroves in this region together. This is one of my favourites. This project has been going for a while, for several years, in the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas. It's prairie grass restoration and connecting people back to the sacred indigenous roots of the prairies. And what's happened here is that that was happening in one diocese, and it's now spread to 11 dioceses as a result of the communion forest. And the bishop who is in this photograph, she's this lady, I don't know if you can see my cursor, she's this lady here, Kathleen Bascom. She's the person behind it. She said, we don't feel invisible anymore, we feel seen. And she's going to be the new Prime Bishop's advisor on the environment. So it all kind of grows. Other parts of the world, Papua New Guinea, one of their communion forest activities is they've planted coffee trees for resilience. They've linked it with child health. So each tree represents, it is linked with the idea of looking after nature, looking after children, and it provides income. Then in Brazil, at the site of the first Anglican church in Brazil, they've set up this ecological sanctuary and nature reserve. And another one in Brazil where they've hooked up with a local HIV charity to create a garden that's about human health and planetary health. So really diverse in ideas. Back down to the Pacific, and the Melanesian brothers, who are Anglican brothers, have set up a forest in Vanuatu, which is one of the, if not the, actually it's the most disaster-prone country in the world. Then we see things between, we have a series of connections across the Anglican Communion, and so between countries that are linked. So in the Diocese of Ottawa in Canada is linking with Uganda to help set up, to plant Indigenous trees in both places. So as well as planting, we're also seeing a massively increased use of giving of trees at confirmations and other significant events, to the extent that some young people are getting a little bit antsy when they're not given a tree at confirmation. They're kind of expecting it now, which is quite amusing. So they're linked with life events, they're linked with memorials, they're linked with when people are ordained. They're used to celebrate friendship. And the one I like, bottom right, in New Zealand, there are a lot of seasonal workers come over from Vanuatu to New Zealand. This parish has planted trees each season so they can remember the seasonal workers who've been with them during the summer period, or the period, so that they're remembered back home. We're also very fortunate. Westminster Abbey did an exhibition about the communion forest in their chapter house last year, and they've become big supporters of the communion forest, which is fabulous. We were able to showcase stories from around the world. And so just coming into land now, the communion forest is, it creates a way that we can bring together all the things happening across the Anglican Communion so that people can be inspired by one another, get fired up to do more, get some ideas, and also see that their little bit is, they might feel it's not much, but it's part of a much bigger whole. And that's been deeply encouraging. This is the team. We're tiny. We have 3 part-time facilitators. We have Irene, who's the facilitator for Africa. New, just appointed Rodrigo, who is the facilitators for the Americas. He's based in Brazil. Irene is based in Kenya. And Nicholas, who's the facilitator for everywhere else. And they're each on a 1.5 days a week. And then I come in as the person from the Anglican Alliance, looking after them. And what we do webinars, we create resources, we share stories, we do all sorts of things, and it's all on the website. And just to move briefly into other activities and where we've seen this to be useful. is that the communion forest gives the Anglican Communion a kind of bit of credibility when we're starting to campaign, when we're campaigning in the spaces like the UN spaces. So the biodiversity COP, it means that we're not just telling people what we'd like them to do, we're doing it. And then people are more willing to listen. And just on that, I wanted to pick up on something Emma said, which was really important. It's this intersectionality and the impact on women in particular, and of climate change. And one of the things, so the Anglican Communion is accredited to the UNFCCC, the climate negotiations, so we can be in the room. And one of our key points is on intersectionality and impacts of climate change on women and youth and Indigenous peoples. That's the big thrust of our advocacy. And just to finish, to say who looks after this. So the Anglican Alliance, that's me. That's the bit of the Anglican Communion that works on development, relief and advocacy and climate change and brings it all together across the Communion. And we also have the Environmental Network of the Anglican Communion, another fabulous organisation. There's loads more, but I wanted to speak on one particular thing for detail. And thank you for listening.
Gilly,
Sorry.
we can't hear you.
Yeah, no, I just realised. Sorry about that. Elizabeth, thank you so much. That was so interesting, and I think gives us a marvellous international perspective on the issue, and fascinating resonances with what Emma was talking about as well. Thank you very much. I will take a few questions. Could I just ask, how do you find the interface is with the politics of the variety of countries in which you're working when you're undertaking projects like this? Have you run into any issues or challenges?
No, because everything is locally driven. So everyone does that for themselves. And in most places, so it's usually, well, so yeah. There are going to be issues in somewhere like Brazil. We have to be really careful with our facilitators and what they're doing, because it's a very dangerous place to be a climate activist.
Absolutely.
But Rodrigo is actually, he's an environmental and human rights lawyer. That's what he does most of the time. So, and he's been involved in the Amazon, so he's fully aware. In lots of places, they seek for partnership, and that would be the case with the Franciscan brothers in the Solomon Islands. They work through the periodic review of the Universal Periodic Review, a UN mechanism where every country has to account for its human rights every 3 years. And that's a really good, that would actually be worth looking at in the UK, to look at climate change from a human rights perspective, not as a climate issue, because it's a really good way into coming and saying, with, say, climate change, how extreme weather events are impacting on human rights or on women's rights. And it's actually quite a smart way of coming at climate change, because the COPs are really, they're huge spaces, but other spaces, there's more room for conversation. So the Franciscan brothers work kind of sort of with the government. They try to do it collaboratively. And then you've got the other extreme. So in Kenya, where the government has asked the church to take over vast quantities, they've actually asked them to take over forest management, because the Kenyan church can get the people motivated and active to look after and restore forests. And they're working hand in glove with the government because they've got a proven track record. So we have the whole spectrum, but it's all done through the local people, not from above. Because yeah, that would be, that's the way we work. It wouldn't work.
Yeah. because yes, as you say, there are some very dangerous situations.
I
Lovely.
think
Thank
Elizabeth
you so much.
and Columbia.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Has anyone else got any specific questions for Elizabeth? And then we can pick up general issues, as I say, after our last few speakers. I can't see. Oh, hold on. We've got a couple of new messages in the chat. Lovely. No, that's fine. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. We'll move on now, I think, to our next group of speakers. And I'm delighted that we've got 3 speakers, 2 with us here at the moment, from the Women's Faith Forum, a fascinating organisation which has groups of women representing each of the major faiths and who work together to ensure that the voices of women are better heard among policymakers. And their aim is to work for a better country for everyone, even as the world around us is in crisis, which I think we probably all agree with. We're hoping that Professor Husna Ahmad is going to be able to join us, but in the meantime, I'm delighted that we have two of her colleagues, 2 other members of the Women's Faith Forum. And first of all, I'm going to introduce Professor Jagbir Yutis Johal, who represents the Sikh community. And Jagbir, you're going to talk to us about the particular perspective of Sikh women with regard to climate change.
Yes,
So
thank
I'm
you.
going to pass over to you. And if you'd perhaps like to just tell us a little bit about your involvement with the Women's Faith Forum as well, that would be really helpful as background.
Okay, and I'm going to share a screen with you.
Oh, great, thank you.
Just 1 second, if I can get it up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, right. Trying to get it into. Okay, so I'm one of the members of the Women's Faith Forum. Sorry, let's start again. So I'm one of the members of the Women's Faith Forum, which was established in 2020. So there are 6 of us, women from 5 of the major faiths in the UK: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism, and Hinduism. And as you mentioned, we try to raise the voices of women of all ages and beliefs to be heard by policymakers because their experience and knowledge of what is happening on the ground is unique and needs to be heard by those in power, and particularly because they can provide a unique perspective on the issues that affect women. And as one of those members and as a trustee of Faiths for the Climate, as a Sikh woman, I have a very strong commitment to protecting human rights and thinking about how climate change is not just political or practical, but that it has a deeply spiritual calling for all of us. And my activism is rooted in the teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib, which reminds me that all life is interconnected and that the earth is not a resource to be exploited, but a sacred gift to be honored and protected. And I think I need to give a bit of a context of what Sikhs do through utilizing the Holy Scripture. Because one of the important things for us as Sikhs, and particularly for me as a woman, is that within the Sikh Scripture, there are a lot of quotes which show our interconnectedness. So here's one verse which says, "The Lord infused his light into the dust and created the world, the universe, the sky, the earth, the trees, and the water. All are the creation of the Lord." And as someone growing up within the faith, there are a lot of images of our gurus, particularly of Guru Nanak, sitting under a tree, praying and listening to others. So the imagery is one of the environment, and it shows the luscious green trees and flowers. And there are many of these depictions. And one And as we go through the Sikh teachings and the scripture, one of the biggest focuses that our teachings focus on is how we need to engage in social justice and civic action. And that activism is inspired by the values and ideals of seva, selfless service, and Sarbat Dapala, welfare of all, which, whilst always taken to imply work towards the collective good of humanity, is now also linked to the environment so that we provide service to nature. And just here's a few more images of the kind of the environment, the flowers, the trees that are that we have. And within that, one of the there's a very nice quote that I really draw on, which is, "You yourself are the bumblebee, the flower, the fruit, and the tree. You yourself are the water, the desert, the ocean, and the pool. You yourself are the great fish, the tortoise, the cause of causes. Your form cannot be known." Right? And thinking about that and thinking about the earth, we, like all other faiths, are taught to revere the earth as a dharamsal, a sacred place established by the Lord to practice dharma and rightful living. In the midst of these, he established the earth as a home for dharma. And one of the other theological belief is that the one creator pervades in everything. So the environment is a manifestation of God, as the previous verses have also shown, and abusing it is akin to abusing God. And the earth, air, water, earth, and sky, the Lord has made these his home and temple. So the Sikh faith prescribes the environment is our teacher and supporter, but requires our respect and stewardship. Thinking of that theology and then thinking of our religious places of worship, one of the most important things that certain religious sites holds for us is that the trees and the pools that surround them are all linked to the nature and environment that we live in. And so here's a couple of images of particular trees being grown, like the neem tree grown within the Gurdwaras. And these are all green trees, making these places of worship and our sites of pilgrimage conscious of the environment. And I think that's an important thing that we need to think about with reference to the work that women are doing today, particularly in the diaspora, the building of Gurdwaras. Thinking of the Gurdwaras and thinking of what has been happening in terms of environmental change, one important thing I think that needs to be noted is that within the Sikh context, women as religious actors in this field are not visible. Organizations, whether it is Eco-Sikh or others, are very male-led, and the images that you will get to see are of those, which is important. But I think it's important to note that a lot of the activity that is being done on the ground with reference to environmental change or raising issues about environmental harm are being raised by women. And I want to kind of think about and talk about Punjab in India. And why that is important is that in the 1960s, we saw this green revolution, which was this increased agricultural production for the region, but it left the ecological foundation severely damaged. And some of the lasting effects include the depletion and pollution of groundwater, droughts, and wildfires. As a result, farmers cannot grow crops or sustain their livestock and are left without their livelihoods, ultimately leading to increased food prices and insecurity. And it is argued and said that Punjab will be rendered a desert within 25 years of this exploitation of its underground water resources, which continues today. Now, the failure of that green revolution and negative impact that this has had on the land of Punjab is clear. And what we see is, in terms of the community, a lot of migration to the west of men, increasing farmers' suicides, so of men, due to debt and poor crops. And then we have the gendered impact, which not many people are talking about. Women face particular hardships due to the environmental degradation and climate change. And this includes women's unique experiences as environmental widows, environmental refugees, or women suffering health and food insecurity, which women in other places like Africa will also experience, where women having to travel further to collect water and wood. What Punjab has shown me is that we cannot assume that environmental change impacts everyone, that we cannot ignore the impact that environmental change has, and that we have to focus on the particular issues that women face. And thinking of that, there's this one lady here, Dr. Inderjit Kaur, who doesn't get that much prominence in terms of the work that she does. Or there's a young lady called Bandana Kaur and Amandeep Kaur, who are spearheading and answering the call to protect the environment. Bibi Inderjit Kaur, in this image, is an example of a woman in the global south leading the way without really being engaged in the field of environmental and climate activism. So you will not see her on these circuits, but she is somebody who is doing a lot of this work quietly and behind the scenes in Punjab. She and her predecessor created a charity which was to serve the underprivileged and those with disabilities within Punjab. But they have also gone into eco-farming and making their charity self-sufficient, which is an important thing that they've been doing. Now, Bandana Kaur, and I don't have an image of her, I'm sorry, but she's a member of EcoSeek, and EcoSeek is an organization that was set up by the diaspora Sikhs to create change back home in Punjab. It's not led by a religious leader, but it is led by a religious man, by a Sikh man, Ravneet Singh. So he is the one who you will see at the UN at various COP meetings, but not the women. And one of the initiatives that EcoSeek have been leading is on planting trees to mark the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak, and that started in 2019. And what is important is a lot of the activity that was being done is being done by women. They have planted trees in Coventry, just thinking about the UK, in Coventry and Greater Manchester, but they've also done so in Punjab and in other countries. One important thing in terms of women, and I would say I'm a middle-aged woman, and Bandana Kaur is one of the younger generation. But what we will see here is an intergenerational shift where women who are making these changes and advocating for making changes with reference to climate change in our religious places of worship. They are doing that through going back and looking at our theology, but also looking at the cultural knowledge that has been imparted by our grandmothers, mothers, etc. And Bandana Kaur is somebody who has done that and drawn on the teachings of her great-grandmother, who told her stories about Punjab's rich animal and plant diversity before the Green Revolution. And using those stories has been able to kind of change the mindset in Punjab in terms of, in some areas, about changing the farming processes. And I think what Bandana Kaur was empowered by was that she said that the Sikh community living outside of Punjab is growing up with a deep sense of what the major problems are in the native land. We are at a stage where the community is growing in its own ambitions, educationally and economically, and will still have a sense of rootedness in the land that shaped our rich Sikh history and heritage. And that's an important motivator in a lot of the eco work that some of these young organizations, but also young women, are doing back home in Punjab. EcoSeek has done a lot of work with reference to the Golden Temple, our holiest shrine within India, which serves over 100,000 meals on specific days. Currently, I think it says 60,000 meals a day. And they have a lot of they have the largest facilities where a lot of people are dependent on langar, which is the communal meals for their food needs. And considering the amount of food that they are dependent on, there's a lot of the focus on installing solar dishes to capture energy from the sun to fuel the heat for cooking, but also to use organic and own grown food, which doesn't rely on pesticides. And she argues that you have to have these strong model Gurdwaras, like the Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib, has models for Gurdwaras throughout the world. And this is very important. We see a lot of Gurdwaras in the diaspora, and I don't know if you have been to a Gurdwara in the UK. What you will see is very large buildings. They look very cathedral-like, but they don't have any greenery around them. They don't have nature surrounding them. What a lot of these places of worship do is they build these big buildings, then they have large lands for car parking. But what a lot of the women are arguing for is that now some of this needs to be rethought, and that we need to start thinking about having a garden, which is for food that can be utilized to provide the communal langar, to be used in the communal langar, but also that it's an opportunity for young people, but also women, but also the elderly to come together to kind of share stories, to socialize, which will kind of end, one, the issue around loneliness and mental health issues, but two, to kind of address the environmental issues that are affecting the wider community. This has been demonstrated quite successfully. This is just some of the EcoSeek's work in terms of tree planting. But this communal garden being associated with Gurdwaras has been demonstrated by an organization called Karma Grow, an initiative with the World Sikh Organization, which has teamed up with various community partners to build community gardens for the sole benefit of food banks and community kitchens. And they grow an assortment of vegetables on multiple sites across Canada. This is very popular in Canada, but there is that demand for it to be rolled out within other countries. And I think within the UK, with some of the larger Gurdwaras, there is a big push by the women for this to happen, because it will create intergenerational community link-ups. It will kind of curtail and curb loneliness, but also address issues around the food supply, etc. Karma Grow, I think, is one of the organizations which has inspired Sikhs, but also non-Sikhs alike, in terms of becoming self-sufficient and not being dependent on processed foods within the free kitchen that we utilize. And I think one of the ladies who is a partner and sponsor of this organization said it very well. Many of us are disconnected from where our food comes from. Here we get to plant, nurse, weed, and seed the end results of something nourishing and practical. Karma means you harvest what you plant. When you do good, it comes back to you. Karma Grow represents the concept in both the literal and spiritual sense. So I think it's important to note how women are utilizing their teachings and the concepts within our theology to help address issues around food poverty, but also with reference to climate change and environmental impact. But what I would like to say is, having just talked about what some of the women are doing, but also and how this has impacted the work that I do within my community, is that women aren't the ones who are visible. If you want to see who is talking about Sikhs and environment in the public arena, it will be the men. But actually, a lot of the groundwork that is being done by women, and particularly young women. And I'll leave it at that.
Jagbir, thank you so much. And I think that link that you draw between the theological background and activism is very interesting indeed. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to go straight to Nima now for another perspective. Husna hasn't been able to join us yet, has she? No, that's fine. So I'm going to come to Nima Sushak, who is also a member of the Women's Faith Forum, representing the Hindu perspective. So it'll be fascinating to hear from you, Nima. I think if you could keep to about 7 or 8 minutes, that would be great. And we'll hope that Husna can join us. If not, we'll have more time for discussion. So over to you. Thank you so much, Nima.
Thank you. I just wanted to, well, thank you for inviting me and great to be with you all. I grew up watching my mum somehow manage to touch the ground as soon as she woke up in the morning. Even before her feet touched the floor, she'd instinctively express gratitude and respect to the earth. That's something that's always stayed with me. In the Vishwamitra Smriti, which is one of the Hindu scriptures, one of the verses says, "O Mother Goddess, the one who is covered with oceans as her garments and mountains as her bosom, the consort of Lord Vishnu, please forgive us for touching you with our feet." Now, while I might not always remember to do the same, for Hindus, showing respect to the earth is a deep-rooted environmental ethic. Nature is not merely a resource, but it's a sacred entity. My Hindu faith emphasizes the interconnectedness of all existence and the importance of living in harmony with nature. My spiritual teacher, so also known as a guru, often quoted the ancient Vedic scriptures that teach us to see that the earth is a mother. So it's Mother Earth, also known as Bhumi Devi, and she is deserving of our reverence and our protection. As a woman, I especially love the concept of the earth being a mother. Adorned with mountains and hills and forests and plants and treasures, the earth takes care of every living being and provides all that is strength-giving and nourishing. The earth gives shelter and is the source of all creativity, and we all depend on her for our growth and our meaningful existence. Respect of the earth has evolved for Hindus, and I suppose for most people, into a movement to promote eco-friendly practices, sustainable living, and conscious consumption. The scriptural belief that God is in everything connects humanity with all existence, which reinforces an intrinsic sense of responsibility towards conservation. There was a study earlier this year by the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life, which found that Hindus are at the forefront. This was surprising to me too, but it was that Hindus are at the forefront of environmental activism, engaging in eco-friendly actions at higher faiths than other faith groups. The study found that 78% of Hindus 78% actively change their consumer habits and 44% join environmental groups. These were facts that made me ask, why. It was a surprising statistic for me as well. Perhaps it's because a principal tenet in Hinduism is karma, which implies that whatever we do has a ripple effect and contributes to what we sow in our next life. A sense of cause and effect reinforces a profound relationship with nature and all of life. And then, of course, Hindus believe that God's creation belongs to him. So therefore, all that is sacred. Therefore, all is sacred, and to care for the environment is to worship God. The religious tradition that I belong to, which is ISKCON, also known as the Hare Krishnas, has recently launched a few years ago launched a global environment initiative, thankfully, because it was work that I felt that wasn't necessarily at the fore of everybody's mind. But it has been set up, and it's called the ISKCON Environmental Initiative, which encourages local temples, communities, and families to live more environmentally conscious and sustainable lives. One of the most visible contributions is the development of eco-villages around the world. Some may have heard of the Govardhan Eco-Village in Maharashtra in India, which was recognized by the United Nations and awarded for its sustainability efforts. This model, as well as others, demonstrate that it's possible to live a modern, comfortable life without exploiting the Earth's resources. One of the main and perhaps most significant way Hindus serve to combat climate change is the promotion of a vegetarian lifestyle. Animal agriculture is one of the leading contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, and water pollution. So by advocating for a plant-based diet, not just for health or animal welfare reasons, but it's seen as a spiritual duty. Hinduism and other faiths, such as Sikhism, reduce the demand for meat and support a lifestyle that aligns with ecological balance. My tradition promotes the welfare of animals. So, there are cow protection projects around the world, including in the UK, in Watford, where people can actually get hands-on with nature, get close to the cows. And it's seen as a way of protecting them rather than using them for farming needs. Eco-farming is promoted. So not using pesticides in organic farming, etc. And there's the Food for Life program, which is international, serves millions of free vegetarian meals globally. And more than just an act of charity, it's seen as an environmental statement. As other traditions and other speakers have mentioned, that women tend to be at the fore of religious engagement and tend to deal with the backlash when things are not necessarily when things are things don't necessarily go the way they need, but including for festivals. So Hindu festivals can be criticized for the amount of wastage, the amount of food, the amount of disposables. But I've been quite proud to see women work together to make changes within the community so that festivals are now, especially nationally, conducted with a more eco-conscious approach. So that would be, for example, using much less plastic and and using biodegradable or reusable plates, etc. The composting of food waste, and using homegrown flowers and vegetables, and sourcing local flowers and produce to feed the masses. So simple living and high thinking has always been part of our philosophy, the Hindu Vaishnava philosophy. So therefore, it's important for practitioners of my faith to act in alignment with our principles of caring about the Lord's property. So just to conclude, by reducing our desires to live simply and being content with less, we not only reduce our ecological footprint, but elevate our consciousness, and we're reminded that a simple life guided by spiritual values can be the most radical act of environmental protection. Thank you.
Nima, thank you so much. I think those are wonderful messages to end on for all of us in discussing climate change in the modern, rather frenetic, consumer-driven world that so many of us live in. So thank you so much for reminding us of that. Can I open the discussion up to everybody now? So please do turn your cameras back on. And then we can take questions, comments, observations, people's own experiences of working in the climate change arena, small wins, big wins, things that you feel that you would like to share with us all, and questions to our eminent speakers to follow up on what they've been saying. So who'd like to start us off? Gwenda, I can see you have your hand up. Gwenda Kibble
Yes.
is a member of NCW, long-standing member who founded our Network 18 to 30 for young women.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Jilly. Yes, I think that it has been extremely interesting and inspirational to hear our speakers today. I'm just reminding us, NCW, Jilly, that way back in the past, we were very much involved with Wangari Maathai. Now, I don't know if that name means anything. Oh, I see some nodding heads. Yes, she was a Kenyan, very well educated woman who tried to help the women of her country who were struggling to find wood to cook their food. And she began encouraging them and helping them to plant trees. Now, unfortunately, she came up against political problems, and she was, in fact, at one point imprisoned. And the National Council of Women in those days actually were instrumental in getting her out of prison. And I had the honor of being at the celebration event in the church in Marylebone Road when we welcomed her following the award of her Nobel Peace Prize, and that was in 2004. So I think this just shows that how different it is. Oh, I've lost my picture. Can you still hear me?
Yes, you're
right.
fine.
Okay. That how different, how much has happened, which we have had the great pleasure of hearing this morning, of a change of scenery. But again, I think that there is a great. I'm pleased that this event is recorded, because I think there is so much in it that we can all use and gather together. And I think, again, it is helping very much to change society. But what we also need is to change at a political level. And I think that's where COP30 comes in, and where we need to see that the whole awful business of stopping using fossil fuels that needs to come into play. And again, it is this, I think, would be greatly helped if it was taken forward, all that has been going on and is going on, which we've had the great pleasure of listening to. And I have further heard of what is happening and what needs to be happening from events at the Hay Festival that I have just been to. And there were several events there on climate change. And I will be putting some of this forward for NCW's attention. But again, it's something else which is showing the wide changes that are going on in society, and how much we need to see that this is backed up by the necessary government activity. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Gwenda. Thank you very much indeed. Anne, I can see you have your hand up. Do you want to comment, add to that?
Yes, I've been looking at survey data, and unfortunately people are losing a bit of enthusiasm for the battle against climate change and for changing their lifestyle to accommodate the planet. And I think, part of the reason is it's difficult for us to see that our own individual efforts are making a difference. And so one of the things that National Council of Women is focusing on is campaigning at international level, and then bringing back to people in the UK information on what is being done globally. to show that they are part of a bigger effort. I mean, because one of the things that people think is that the UK is doing more than its fair share. And so, you know, we need to show, and especially in the current climate, we need to find allies to work with, which we're doing very successfully internationally. We work closely, for instance, in the International Council of Women, and have just put a resolution to the International Council of Women on climate change, working with the Canadian Council of Women. And that is asking all the members of the International Council of Women to send back a record of what's going on in their country, what's happening in terms of climate change, and the efforts they are making to combat it, and the best practice examples from their countries, so that we can share the best practice, all really with the focus on showing, yes, it is worthwhile. What you're doing is worthwhile. It all joins up, this effort, when we put it all together, can save the planet.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think it is really helpful to be reminded of that, because it is easy to feel that one's just a very small cog in an enormous wheel that you stand little chance of influencing. And sharing good practice, I think, is so important, isn't it? And small successes, small wins as well, where things actually have made a difference. Laura, I see you have your hand up.
Hello. First of all, I just wanted to say what wonderful contributions we've had this lunchtime, all so different and so well informed. It was an absolute pleasure to listen. Just something anecdotal, really, which is, I think, in my family, amongst the generation of my kids and my nephews and nieces and so on, I think that the last speaker was absolutely right. I think that people, maybe people in the West, are feeling increasingly like we can't make a difference. And, you know, our saving a plastic bag, or our not eating meat, or our whatever it is that we do as our bit, seems to make no difference. And so many of the young people I know have gone back to eating meat and just sort of feeling like they actually don't make a difference. And I understand that. And it's sort of in a way counterintuitive, but in a way I can really see why there's a feeling that my not eating meat, or whatever it is that people do, doesn't make a difference. Having said that, I gave up meat to make a symbolic point, and I find it quite a good way to make a symbolic point. But I think if you're young and you've given it up and you really would like to be eating meat or using plastic bags or whatever it is, I can see the frustration. And I really agree that the only real way to make a difference is going to be at a national and international level. And, you know, the role of grassroots is as much to put pressure on policymakers than as anything else, or probably more to put pressure on policymakers than anything else, than it is to do the bit. So all of the initiatives we've been hearing about today are absolutely fascinating, but the job is to take those initiatives and demonstrate to policymakers that they make a difference, or that people are prepared to do them, or that people are working on this all around the world at a grassroots level. And particularly these issues around women, and how women are particularly affected by climate change, which is in all sorts of ways that are not things that seem obvious, but when you think about them, are really, really important. So I think anything we can do collectively at a policy level, using all of this as demonstrations of what can be done and why it matters, is the way we need to go collectively. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Laura. Very thoughtful comments. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I see that Husna has managed to join us. Husna, welcome and happy Eid. We really appreciate your taking time to join us on such an important day for you and your family and your community. It's a joy to see you. As you all have gathered, we've had some fabulous speakers from your own organisation and also from the Anglican Communion and the Women's Institute. I'm sorry you missed them, but we have a recording. I know it's sort of bouncing you straight into it, but I wondered whether you wanted to say a few words to us all as you now have managed to join us from your perspective.
Thank you so much, Gilly. Thank you, Anne, as well, for accommodating me. Eid Mubarak to all of you. I'm in Glasgow today, in Scotland, with my son and his family. We had a wonderful prayers, and then, you know, we've just eaten and come back to the house now. So thank you for your patience, and I'm glad Jagbir, and I haven't had the honor of meeting Elizabeth, but, you know, hopefully soon we'll meet. And Nima, thank you so much. So I wanted to talk from both my personal and religious belief in terms of the work on protecting human rights and preventing climate change, and you know, really looking at that area. So first of all, my question to all of you is, what is our role as the human race to protect the environment, to protect our precious planet? How do we initiate the reversal of the Anthropocene? How do we remind ourselves that we are merely stewards or caretakers of this beautiful planet? Each and every one of us has a responsibility to protect Earth, because it is our species which has and continues to destroy it through our greed and selfishness. Furthermore, without achieving balance between mankind and nature, we're poised to face dire consequences which threaten the existence of life on this planet. WWF's Living Planet Report 2020 has already validated the concern, revealing that 1 million species of animals and plants are threatened with extinction, with a staggering decline of more than 68% observed among wildlife populations. I believe that the main issues facing the planet today are war and conflict, a polycrisis, the triple planetary crisis, and poverty and inequality. They bring out the best and the worst in people and communities. As a Muslim, I believe in the interconnectedness of all who live on our planet and the impact of our actions in the past, the present, and the future. Within religious traditions, including Islam, relations between humans and other elements of the natural world are not compartmentalized, but instead conceived of as being tied into a series of continuous spiritual interactions. Our blessed Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reminded us that our lives on this planet are for a finite time. Beautifully. So he said, I am in this world like a rider who halts in the shade of a tree for a short time, and after taking some rest, resumes his journey, leaving the tree behind. Ahmed Tirmidhi. As a British, Bangladeshi Muslim woman, I often find that my voice is marginalized or even silenced, and at times it feels as though my advocacy is dismissed as mere complaints. Yet women like me, as you've seen from the beautiful women who spoke earlier today, we are leading the change for peace building, poverty alleviation, and climate justice across the world, holding societies and families together, especially in the global majority, which is the global south, where the impact of climate change is most severe. How do we, as a global community, ensure that the leadership of women of faith is not only acknowledged, but that their solutions are implemented at the highest levels? How can we elevate their voices so that the transformative potential they bring is truly recognized and harnessed? In the 2022 OECD report, it stated that of the $2.4 billion in climate finance, which was channeled through civil society, only $43 million went to organizations and movements led by women. The OECD report in 2016, there was only 2% of gender responsive climate funding went to civil society organizations in the global south. So, you know, it's not been calculated since then, though. So why is this work so important? The scale of the current ecological crisis demands clear, decisive, and compassionate leadership across society, a space where women of faith are uniquely positioned to lead. We need to be attentive to the kind of leadership we need. This is about the leadership of listening and about giving hope and inspiration. It's about putting community, compassion, and inclusivity at the heart of all that we do. There is really a lack of representation and inclusion of women in the climate space. This is in spite of the socialized positioning of women across the world, making them a critical group to mobilize in mitigation and adaptation interventions. Inequalities in decision-making and leadership in climate change persists. So in 2021, men still fill 67% of climate-related decision-making roles, and women's representation in national and global climate negotiating bodies remains below 30%. What is clear is that faith communities shape values, decisions, and behaviors, yet women of faith remain underrepresented in global climate strategy. We need to network to bridge siloed climate work, create more coordinated and focused efforts using shared and bridgeable faith beliefs. So our task, it's not easy. The sheer scale of the issues we're facing is overwhelming. An average of 21.5 million displaced people worldwide annually due to climate change, with 50% of them women and girls. By 2050, we could be looking at 200 million people needing humanitarian assistance annually due to the effects of climate change. And the think tank IEP is predicting 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. The faithful, those of us who adhere to a faith or belief, we're trying in our small way to remind our communities about our duties and responsibilities to this planet. Faith communities have historically been significant innovators in supporting social justice, challenging inequity, and bringing about social change. Faith is a powerful global tool that can be used to inspire, mobilize, and gain commitment from communities to act together to alleviate extreme poverty, advance peace-building efforts, combat the triple planetary crisis, and achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. However, in order to promote peaceful and inclusive societies and create an environment of cohesion, it's important that all faith communities and their contribution towards human civilization is recognized, appreciated, and celebrated. Are we being appreciative, and do we recognize and understand the complexity of local contexts rather than just through a Western lens? For example, deforestation. Women are told, sorry, someone behind me. Women are told not to cut down trees. However, they need firewood to cook. So we are asking them to do the impossible. The climate agenda must align with local contexts and needs. At the grassroots level, people are struggling to survive. Women's socialized positioning across the globe render them more vulnerable to climate disasters and climate change, and 80% of those displaced by climate change are women. So they are in positions of caregiver, and they lack financial assets with limited rights to land and property, yet simultaneously frequently positioned in close proximity and relation to the environment and natural resources. They are more involved in processes relating to primary users of natural resources, primary responsibility for gathering food, fuel, and fodder, and care for their communities. This reveals the importance of their voices and recognition of their work, that it's essential if we're to be successful in combating climate change. We have to recognize the special values and styles of women leadership, which we bring to the table. Languages of love, care, kinship, and collective concern. I don't know if I can be hopeful for the future of this planet when so many of us are treated with disdain as if we don't matter. My sense is that the legacies of empire and colonialism are still felt today, but in a different form. We do not need to look far to be reminded of the injustices which ensued during the Industrial Revolution, the brutal history of colonialism, and the violence inflicted upon colonized populations. Did you know that in the UK, the vast majority of environmental organizations have said bold words on inclusion, but are not being matched with action? As research shows, the sector still lags far behind others in racial diversity. Only about 1 in 20 workers in the environmental charity sector identified as an ethnic minority last year, according to a survey of organizations, compared with 1 in 8 in the wider UK workforce. The findings of a recent survey by Race revealed the environment, climate, sustainability, and conservation sector as one of the UK's least diverse. In this global climate space, I really hope we can overcome the challenges associated with stereotypes and prejudice, which often occur with power imbalances, the white savior mentality, which further compound the problem of inclusion. And we will require significant effort to address imbalances and misperceptions. Now, what is the role of women of faith in protecting the environment? I've spoken about it, but if we think about the community and the spiritual aspect, in the Quran 6:38, it says, there is no animal on the earth or any bird that wings its flight, but is a community like you. The community is critical to developing a sense of purpose and focus towards peace and promoting climate justice. It is more imperative than ever that we can showcase positive models of working towards peace, security, and climate justice. How can we remain spiritually connected whilst also being involved politically in the temporal world, such as joining the United Nations COPs discussions? There were 3 UN COPs last year. All of them had faith pavilions or faith groups convening them. In Azerbaijan for COP29, in Colombia, COP16, and Riyadh in Saudi Arabia for UNCCD. Our role, I believe, is to be the moral compass and ethical leaders in the climate space. Through our congregations and communities, we're able to amplify our voices and raise our concerns about climate change. In 2019, the Charter of Mecca was launched by the Muslim World League, which is an international NGO. The Charter also has a focus on climate change, and it aligns really well with the United Nations SDGs and Agenda 2030. So this highlights to me how they can play a global role. This highlights to me that all the faith communities may wish to reflect inwardly about how they can play a global role in promoting climate justice. Also last year, at the United Nations Summit for the Future in New York, the Pact of the Future was announced, which reaffirmed the 3 pillars of the United Nations: sustainable development, peace and security, and human rights. I'm glad that the Pact for the Future recognizes the importance of the different but connected elements to achieve results. You know, it's all well and good on paper, but the last couple of years have shown serious cracks in the United Nations because of the role or stance played by member states. How accountable will the member states be to the UN through this pact? What are the penalties that can be meted out for non-compliance? What is glaring in the pact is that it's omission of the role of faith communities. If the UN really wants to rebuild trust, strengthen solidarity, and deepen international cooperation, who are the best placed to do all of these? Us, the faith communities, and our institutions. So I've spoken a lot. Finally, I just wanted to say that, you know, my religion teaches me patience and hope in God's mercy. I believe in the power of prayer, and I believe that faith-based solutions cannot only come from the physical or animate. The spiritual power of faith is far bigger than we can ever imagine. And I want to, you know, really thank my colleagues from the Women's Faith Forum for joining on such short notice and being partners, you know, for this wonderful event today. So shout out to Laura, Joy, Nima, and Jagbi, who are on this call. Thank you so much.
Husna, thank you so much. I feel an electronic round of applause coming on. Really, really fantastic. And I think, you know, an absolute call to action that you have given us. I really like the moral compass and ethical leaders badge, if you like, that you have identified for faith communities. I think also for women. That's where we can really play a role in different stages and different environments. So thank you so much for, I think, giving us real hope and a way forward, a way of actually operationalizing these major challenges of climate change. I'm sure there are comments and thoughts from my colleagues here. I'm just quickly scanning my screen. Oh, Anne, yes, you've got your hand up. Anne Davison.
Yes, hello. Hi, Husna. Thank you for coming, despite all the celebrations that you just come from. You're very factored in, I'm very aware of this, Husna, with all the UN opportunities for getting our voices heard. And you've spoken very eloquently about how women's voices need to be heard more strongly. We're good at getting in through the Commission on the Status of Women and the preparatory meetings like that. We're on the International Council of Women. We're not so good at getting our voices heard in UNEP and COP. And I'm wondering if you can suggest to us, Husna, how we could, where we can make inroads where there are opportunities to feed in our comments or to attend international meetings.
Julie, should I respond now?
Yes, please, Husna. Yes, please do.
Hi, Anne. So basically, the United Nations Environment Programme has something called Faith for the Earth Coalition, which I'm the chair of the steering committee. And we're working towards something called United Nations Environment Assembly, which is taking place this December in Kenya, Nairobi, where UNEP is housed. So if what we've got at the moment, we've got about 92 accredited FBOs with us. And 30th of June is the deadline for the applications for any FPOs who want to join. And then they'll be reviewed and by December, those who are accepted will be able to join us. But the only issue is that they have to be working in either a region or in multiple countries. It can't be a national FPO. It has to be an FPO that's working across different areas and have some climate change or adaptation mitigation type of work that they're doing.
And faith, do they have to be faith, Husna?
They have to have some connection with the faith, I guess. Yeah, that's something that they're looking at. But then again, I don't know if WRI is a member, but it for this is because it's the Faith for Earth Coalition. I'm presuming it would be. Yeah. So there may be organizations within the NCW who are who would fit in that, and they're welcome to connect with me, and I can send them the information. No problem. The other thing that you can do, which it doesn't need to be accreditation with UNEP, is a new initiative that was launched in Azerbaijan last year with Mary Robinson. So Mary Robinson is the person who's been obviously the former president of Ireland, but she's also the person who's really been pushing something called the Dandelion Project. And the Dandelion Project is about a women's movement on climate. So that is something that we're really keen on having more women join, and from all over the world, because the ask is not much, but so that way we can all be involved. So I think that is something that I would really push with NCW, and I know WFF, we're keen to, I'm already part of that. So I'm on the steering committee for, it's called the Women and Faith Climate Network. And it was launched, and we're now sort of looking at our next steps of how we build this.
Fabulous, Husna. Thank you. Really interesting. We'll certainly look into those possibilities, and the Dandelion Project. I have come across that as definitely something to follow up. Thank you. Elizabeth, you got a comment.
Thank you. I've just felt so inspired by everyone else's talks, and I just wanted to reflect back on something that I'm picking up, and I might be stating the blindingly obvious here, but whatever. I think what's really obvious is that both as women and as people of faith, we just see the world differently from the main narrative that is actually the one that's controlling the world, which is the colonial, Western, extractive, male model of how the world works. But what women and faiths represent is the much deeper deeper understanding of the world. And in fact, one thing I've felt a lot recently is the way the world works is the one that's completely out of tune with science, and all is out of touch with reality. We live in a finite world, and we're all interconnected. And the dominant narrative that's controlling the world says resources are infinite, and we take. And so it's almost an encouragement to be really confident in our narrative, because sometimes we can present the way we see the world, and we're kind of, that kind of pat on the head kind of response, that we're the ones being idealistic. And it's just that we're not. We're actually being hugely realistic about how we understand the world. And so, and the reason for saying this is that I think the policy changes are essential, but they can only happen if the climate if the politicians, they need the climate in which they can act. And so part of the task of faiths and women is to keep telling the narrative of actually we are interconnected, and the current overriding model cannot work. So it's about confidence and to change the narrative as well as the policies. And I think what I've heard is really powerful narratives that we all have for ways of explaining the world and seeing the world that are holistic and beautiful and kind and real. And they make connections, they don't separate people. And it's just, yeah, it might be saying the obvious, but thanks.
Not at all the obvious, I think, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for bringing that together so well. Very, that's excellent. Thank you. Emma, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I think I'm very on a similar vein to Elizabeth, and I mean, I just thank my fellow speakers, because it's been really enlightening and interesting to hear you. And the Women's Institute is not a faith-based organisation. We've always been secular in that sense, but I was struck by so much similarity in terms of the roots of why our members are campaigning on this issue, connection to the natural world, and fundamentally a belief that each of us has a power to do something. And I love Nima's points about simplicity, because I think that really resonates with our members, making small changes that feel small when you're making them in your home, but also Elizabeth's point about that being such an important thing to demonstrate to those who have power, actually, that we are making change within the sphere that we have, whether that's in our own homes, our own lives, in our own communities. And actually we need all of those who hold power to do the same within their realm. So it's just been lovely for me to hear from so many organisations that are quite different, but to hear that we're holding so much in similarity. So it's been wonderful to be part of this, and I thank you all.
Thank you, Emma. Fabulous to have such a range of perspectives, isn't it? I think it really adds a richness to the debate. So thank you to all of you. Joy, you have a comment.
Yes, hello. I'm really inspired, and particularly where the conversation's got to in the last few minutes. I think I wholeheartedly endorse all of that. So the comment I'm going to make now is going to bring that sort of crescendo down to a sort of minor point. So forgive me for making this right at the end, but it just occurred to me about 10 years ago, in our kind of organisations, there was a real push, and it came from our kind of organisations, to ensure that there was an annual statement that would be made in companies' reports about modern slavery. And we all know what that's about in terms of all of the work that we do in terms of anti-trafficking, anti-human trafficking, and so on. And that did come from the voluntary sector. And an organisation I was involved in at the time, was very much involved in that. And I know that some quoted companies do have to make statements about climate change activity, but I just wonder if that's something that we could focus on as a policy change, so that we could bring together all of it just brings some sort of push towards a sort of a national recognition. This is something that we need to report on. I mean, to get that into a director's report and to get the legislation changed was quite a big push, but it actually has made a difference. And every single company on the register of Companies House must have a statement to this effect in their director's reports. And that brings everything to the surface. There was a huge amount of work that had to be done in order to get those reports, those statements made. So I just make that as a suggestion, but not to take away from the rich conversation that we've just had in the last few minutes in particular.
Indeed, thank you, Joy. I think that's a really interesting comment. As you say, it is a sort of practical application of what we've been talking about. And I think while sometimes one can feel that asking, for example, companies to put particular elements in their reports can perhaps feel as if it's not quite window dressing, but it's a bit, it's not addressing the issue. The fact is that it then gets into the fabric of the organization, doesn't it? And I think that's the point. That comes from that then people have to think about it. And I think that is really interesting. Yes. I mean, that I don't know myself whether companies have to report on, for example, what they do about climate change.
Some do, but not your average, not our kind of organisations. So I think public sector and voluntary sector organisations would be a good thing. Even if it was just at a kind of what are you doing as opposed to what have you achieved.
Yes, that's something we could maybe work on together. Just remind me where you're from, Joy.
So I'm part of the Women's Faith Forum, but I work for an organisation called Oasis. So we have lots of organisations. We're a group of organisations. So yeah.
I know we've met before at these meetings, but yeah, so it's lovely. Great, thank you so much. Anne, another comment.
But I just wanted to say in response to Joy that coincidentally, our next event like this in July will be on the trafficking of women and how what the private sector can do to prevent it, because we're always trying to look at, positive things that we can do as women and how we can achieve change. It will be
it's worth asking them to report on their modern slavery statements, because they all have to make them in their company reports. Yeah,
exactly. Brilliant. So please, stay in touch with the National Council of Women, take a look at our website and so on. Maybe even join, that would be brilliant. And you'll see the ad for this next event.
Great. Thank you, Anne, for reminding us of that. That's excellent. Can I just point out, Gwenda, I see you've got your hand up. I just wanted to mention the comment in the chat from Kate Willoughby mentioning storytelling and narrative. And I do think that's a really important issue. I think storytelling can often put across complex issues in a way that makes them really accessible to people. With starting a project on storytelling in terms of capturing older members of NCW's ideas and thoughts and hopes for the future. I'm wondering whether storytelling is something that maybe the WI and we could work on together, Emma, in the future, capturing examples of what people are doing, how they're doing it, and sharing that. Sharing practical information in that way. So, Kate, thank you for that thought. We'll certainly try and pick that up. Gwenda, back to you. You're on mute.
What I'm going to say actually follows on from what you have just said and what the previous speaker has just said. But what I just wanted to say was that something that what I'm going to say does not apply to anyone who has been speaking today or who is part of those organizations. But there is a huge amount of misinformation and disinformation which falls into everyone's smartphones. And this is something which is influencing, I think, some of the people who we've heard mentioned today as people who are going back to eating steak and all that. Now, I think that this is a very important issue. I also know that we are not hearing what the scientists are telling us about climate change, and that this is because it is not in the media. And we know that, unfortunately, much of the media is in fact, I actually do no longer look at the newspapers, only one of them, and that's the Independent, because it's just big money that we're up against. So I just would like to make the point that I think we or all of us here today need to be doing everything we can to see that there is good publicity about what we are doing, which is enormously good, but we need a lot more publicity about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwenda. Very important. We are at the end of our time. Any last comments or observations from anyone? Oh, thank you. Yes, Emma's just popped a note in the chat. The Global Action Plan are doing work about climate misinformation and disinformation. Yes, we had a Global Action Plan at one of our other online debates. Very interesting organisation. I think there's so much that organisations can be doing together on this, which also helps address, I think, some of what Gwenda has just been reminding us of, the need to get publicity with clear information for people about this issue. No other final comments? Well, I think it just, oh, Nima, you've got your hand up. No? It just remains for me to thank everybody, our speakers, Emma, Elizabeth, Nima, Jagbir, and Husna, so much for really inspiring and varied talks. I think we've covered so many different aspects of climate change and what we can do about it, both practically in our day-to-day lives and at a deeper, more spiritual level, and at a different political and social level. So thank you so much for bringing all of those threads together for us, and giving us challenges for the future. I sincerely hope that we'll work together on this as we go forward. I think it's well, it will continue to be such an important topic. As we heard, the WI have been working on it since the early 20th century. We've been working on it certainly for the last 25 years. So there's still a long way to go. So thank you so much, everybody. Wonderful to see so many of you. Do keep an eye on the NCW website. Those of you who aren't members yet, do join. Obviously, these online debates are open to everybody, but it's lovely to have you as members as well. And keep in touch, write to us with any ideas and thoughts following today's debate as well, where we will be picking up a lot of these issues. So thank you so much, everybody. Husna and your family, enjoy the rest of your celebrations, and all those of you who are involved in Eid celebrations. We wish you well and celebrate in spirit with you.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll say farewell to you now. Bye-bye.